Hello everybody. All looks good from my end. Looks like we're up and running. Studio Cat is with us today. He's going to be making the executive decisions on the chroma and value for the flowers. He's probably purring into the mic at the moment. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Speaking of which, do let me know in the chat box if you can see me and if you can hear me okay, please. You one down there? Knows I've started talking, going to be painting and running around. Oh, okay, let's get the claws off. Come on then. The little fella. I give him about 30 seconds before he's asking to be out. Looks like everything's running and all working and lovely, so that's great. I'm just going to set up this little bit so I can see all the comments much better whilst I'm painting. And then I think we'll be ready to go. Great stuff, thank you. So today, session 5, indeed, it is going by very quickly. One more session after this one, and this is the second session on our final painting. So I've got mine up on the easel here from last week, and all of our paintings are a fairly similar kind of level. You could call it kind of a rough blocking, but it sounds like one of the blockings has already found a home, Heather, hasn't it, with your art teacher? So that's really nice. And you could absolutely leave them at this stage if you wanted to, but today we're going to be, a watchword today is subtlety. So we're going to be trying to bring in some of the smaller forms, address some value and chroma issues where we feel we have them. And the first thing we're going to be doing once we've got our oil couch on is putting in the highlights. Because up to now there is almost no white paint in there. There's a little bit in some of the mixes, but not very much. And the highest part of our value range we haven't used yet, so there's a whole part of our value range that we're going to use. Pretty much the first thing that we do to help the painting start to come to life a little bit more. And you really have a couple of different choices today about how you want to proceed. Choice 1, if you're happy to work on perhaps after the stream is finished, or you're happy to spend we're probably going for a couple of hours today, you can put an oil couch over the whole of the painting, okay, and work across the whole of the painting. Or you can put an oil couch across the parts that you feel you'll be working on today. Now for me, I'm probably going to be working across these 3 roses mostly. So I'm probably not going to put an oil couch around the leaves, around here, and on the background. Okay. The reason for that is because I don't like to build up too many layers of oil, because I find if you put a layer of oil down and then you don't paint into it, number 1, it takes a long time to dry. And number 2, it tends to almost kind of, it feels like it re-wets itself when you go and put another layer on. And if you put another layer of oil about a week later onto a layer of oil that you didn't paint into, that has no pigment in it, I find it tends to stay tacky for a very long time and you start to get into problems. So it depends how far you're going to work through your painting today. Studio Cat is just asking to be out. You want to be out, little man? Go and get some dinner. Must be hungry. Sorry about that. He just woke up as I was setting up. Really, it's up to you. Or you could do, if you wanted to, you could just put an oil couch down as you go. Like just do a single flower and paint more on that flower and then move on like that and see how you go as you get through it. I've got water today. I'm afraid I've got a bit of a cold. Lots of comments about snow I noticed in the comment box today. And we've had a little bit as well. I was out this morning about 7 o'clock in the morning on our trampoline because we're in lockdown, and that's my exercise that I do, part of it. And it was actually snowing on me when I was out on the trampoline this morning. Probably a really stupid idea when I've got a cold, but there you are. Okay, I'm going to switch over to the palette and the easel now. And knock this big light off because we don't need that. There we go. Straight oil couch today, yes, Jan. Very good point. So the first couch that we put down before we painted up to this stage was 50-50 solvent and oil. I used cold pressed linseed oil and terps. And today's couch is going to be purely oil, and this is in order to preserve or to adhere to the fat over lean rule. And the reason for the fat over lean rule, in case it's never been explained to you before, is when you're painting something, you don't want a second layer to dry faster than the layer underneath because it will tend to crack. So if you have a thick oil layer underneath and then you put a more solvent-based thinner layer over the top, and that dries more quickly whilst the bottom layer is still drying, it can cause cracking. Okay. So you want to get something that you can put a little bit of linseed oil into. And the way I tend to approach it is just to rub it on with my thumb. Makeup brushes apparently are great. Still haven't managed to get hold of one and try it. Imagine how much trouble I'd be if I stole one from Michelle and started using it in my paintings. Quite a lot, I can tell you. So I have the paints already laid out here. So here are the paints from the palette list. So we've got titanium white, bright yellow lake, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, quinacridone rose, green gold, transparent red oxide, raw umber, black, and also phthalo green, just in case we go on to any leaves. Now for me today, if I was going to do anything on the leaves, I would probably only want it in order to shape some of the shapes of the flowers, because I think stuff like areas like the leaves, and like I see this rose as being the least important in the composition, and the leaf areas, I tend to I like to see some areas more finished before I decide how much I'm going to paint those. I think I would say at this point of the process of painting, it becomes a bit more of a personal decision about what you most want to work on next. For me, I would suggest working on primarily on these two flowers. And the reason for that is you quite often find that if you bring some areas of a painting to more of a finish, that the other bits, either they don't bother you so much, or you find that you only need a few strokes to kind of finish them off and then they look fine. Whereas if you start with the least important elements first, like the leaves, say, and these roses at the back, and finish those to a high standard, and then you finish the flowers at the front, sometimes you don't have the focus. There's no focus in the painting. It'll be the same all the way across, which again is an aesthetic choice and fine. Kathy, the two yellows I've got here are bright yellow lake and cadmium yellow, 3 yellows, and yellow ochre. So here I have mixed the value scale. So this is just from raw umber and white. Not neutral, but quite close to. So this is the middle value, which is white in the middle of the palette. This value is halfway between this value and white, and this value is halfway between the middle value and black. So you can almost think of the palette as having a grid. across it. By no means do you have to lay out your palette this way. It just really helps you with something as difficult as flowers to keep a really good focus and control on your value. As we saw in the first session, you can create that feeling of translucent petals and light just with value, with no color at all. So the value is the most important thing. After the value, I would say the edges in showing the form, because simply with value and edges, you can show form really carefully. Hello, Francesca, nice to see you. Kathy, it's not light, medium, or deep. It's from the palette list. It's just cadmium yellow. It's Michael Harding cadmium yellow. Coming in. Come on then. What? I can't help you there, I'm afraid. What do you want out? Okay. It's very cold out, little fella. Hang on just a second, I'll be back, I'm sorry. Jasper? Oh, you're there. Shell, can you watch out for Bandit? I've just let him out. I've only just let him out, but it's really cold outside, you know. Sorry about that. Okay, I've completely forgotten what I was talking about now. I should stop letting Studio Cat run my life, really, shouldn't I? Right, oh yeah, the colours. So these are, everything from here down are the colours from session 4. So this strip here is the colours for the white roses. We've only mixed 4 colours. I'm mostly only going to be using 3 of them in these more neutral ones. And then these are the colours for the orange rose. Now we've all painted both of them before, so hopefully we'll be able to find our way into them a little bit easier today. So, couch first. Now what I'm going to do is get some oil on my thumb, and I'm going to start off playing with these 2 roses. So I'm just going to, you need to make sure your painting has to be completely dry, touch dry, for this to work, which is why, you know, if you did yours only a day or so ago, then you won't be able to do this stage yet, because as soon as you start rubbing oil over it, you'll start lifting the paint. If you're rubbing it and you're with your thumb or your finger, and your thumb or your finger comes away with paint on it, then that's probably your painting is not quite dry enough to do this with. And if we'd have had around the highlights, around here and around here, if we'd have had titanium white in there, very light colours, you wouldn't be able to do this at this point. David says, why not 70% oil and then further sessions 80, 90, 100? Yeah, absolutely could do it that way. I find, I mean, in this workshop, we're doing 3 sessions on this painting. The session next time, the last session, will probably be mostly detail. We may be using a little bit of an oil couch here and there, but we'll be painting all of the highlights with colours with a lot of titanium white in them today, and they probably won't be dry by next week, so you won't be able to rub an oil couch over it again. So this will very likely be the last oil couch, apart from perhaps some small areas where you want to put it in the shadows, if it's dry enough to do that. But if you were painting over like multiple layers, then yeah, I guess it would make sense. To be honest with you, I'm too rough with my mixing anyway of my quantities to do it that carefully, you know. But it would make sense, yeah, it would make sense if you're going to do it that way. I think I very rarely have more than three layers, 3 sessions into a painting. So I've just rubbed this over these 2 flowers, but right over the edge as well, and into the leaves and into the background, because I want to be tightening up the drawing as well at this point. Some of the decisions that you make will depend on your blocking. So if I'm looking at this blocking, I'm looking at this area, I can see that there's too much chroma here. So I want to drop this chroma. So I'll paint over it with a lower chroma, but some of this will still show through. And the same here, I've got a little bit too much chroma here, so I'll paint over it with lower chroma. Right. Yeah, that can happen. The green with the Arallage yellow can take a long time to dry. I suspect you had a little bit too much oil in your couch the first go through. Adana says, what's the lowest value mix for the white rose? It's at the value, do you mean in terms of Munsell, Dana? If you mean Munsell, it's value 3. Like this is for the white roses, this is the lowest value, and it's the deep orangey red for the middle of this rose. I just got paint on it, didn't mean to do that. But that warm orange from the inside aside, it's the next one up, which is just below halfway down the value scale. So they don't really go all that low, but there will be a few details that you'll want to go a little bit lower. Now, one thing worth bearing in mind about the couch as well is that what can happen from this point on, you're working in multiple layers, so there's always a risk of sinking in. Equally, if your painting isn't completely touch dry before you start to put on your next couch, you will probably find the next day that you'll have sinking in. So a lot depends on the timing, really, and I think a lot of it will depend on the temperature where you work, the pigments you're using, the brand of oil. You know, so that it's a bit like a bread recipe. There's so many variables, it's very difficult to give exact timings for this stuff. You know, I also don't know how thickly you painted, so, you know, it's really hard to say for sure. If your green has run into your white a little bit, I would wipe it back and just be really careful not to touch the green in this session. Just paint on the flowers. No, I wouldn't wipe off the oil at this point, because I've pushed it right into the panel, and I've put in a very thin layer. So it's not brushed on, it's rubbed in. If you painted it on, then yeah, wipe it off. That will be too much oil. And Anne-Marie says, could you send us a link to the appropriate Munsell book with the removable chips like you use, please? Yeah, Anne-Marie, you just look up the Munsell Big Book of Colour, glossy edition in Google, and you will find it, but I will do that, yes. Mariana says, what does that mean, sinking in? Sinking in is when you come back to a painting after you've worked on it for a second session, and especially the dark areas have gone very matte, and that usually they drop in chroma and they come up in value, so it kind of it disturbs the surface of the painting, and until you've varnished it, those areas will look very matte and lighter than they should be. It looks pretty horrible, you know. You spent a lot of time trying to build up really careful values, like this these areas around here would be prone to sinking in the darks. And then it's also very difficult to judge your values after that point, because the values in the painting are out. So what people generally do if they get sinking in is they oil out, but you can own, which basically means what we've just done is to wipe a little bit of oil over the area that we're going to work on. But that will often make sinking in worse as well on the next session. It's basically, it's an ongoing problem that you have to deal with multi-layer paintings. If you're careful, if you're really careful, you can really minimize it and you won't get too much. Just trying to think of if I can show you something like this painting. See if I can show you this. This was done on a live stream the other day in a single session. Can you see it's a fairly similar kind of satin finish all the way across, like oil paint usually is. This one was done in, oh, it's still wet. I just put my finger in the paint. This one was done in 2 sessions. So it was oiled out in the second session and has kept that kind of fresh, mostly fresh sort of, you know, it looks fairly satin all the way across. Okay, so that one worked well and didn't sink in. This one I'm currently working on at the moment, and it has sunk in. Can you see when I catch the light, some of it is quite shiny and some of it is not. This area here has sunk in. So this value here, this value area, I painted darker than that, and it had more chroma, and it makes it very tricky. I'm tempted to wipe some oil on that to show you oiling out, but I shouldn't do it if I'm not going to paint into it, and I want to finish this painting, so I won't. The way sinking in happens is the layer underneath the layer you're working on sucks the oil out of the pigment, and you're left with an underbound surface, meaning that you can sometimes literally brush it off. So it's something to try and avoid if you possibly can. But you may find, depending on the oil you're using, the thickness of the paint, the temperature, the phases of the moon, and whether Mars is in the ascendant or not, I don't know. You might find a little bit of sinking in as you go through into further sessions on a painting. It's worth looking up and Googling it, but basically that's what sinking in is. And it's really, really annoying when it happens. Martin says, when you varnish, though, you won't see the sunken colours. Isn't that right? Mostly, yes, with a slight caveat. I have varnished and found that sunken areas don't take quite the same gloss as unsunken areas, in which case you really need to let the varnish dry and put another coat on. So it's best just to try and avoid it if possible. And the best way to avoid it is to make sure that your painting's completely dry before you oil out again. Betty says, are we going to mix the two lighter colours that are on your palette? Yes, they were in the email to say to mix those two lighter colours as well. I'm not going to mix those in the session though. This lighter one here was from session 2 and this one was from session 3. If you want to mix this one, the quickest way to get there is probably, it's mostly titanium white with a little bit of yellow ochre and a very small amount of raw umber. This one you can get pretty close to very, very quickly with mostly titanium white, a very small amount of transparent red oxide and a small amount of cad yellow. Okay. How do the indirect painters handle sinking in? As I've just said, Daphne, this is what we're doing. This is indirect painting now. We're working in layers. By definition, this is indirect painting. I would say this approach that I'm using here is kind of a hybrid approach. But you basically need to be very careful with your fat over lean rule, and you need to make sure that the painting surface is completely dry before you oil out. Okay. I didn't realize that it wasn't so much common knowledge about it sinking in. It's something I've been dealing with for years and have struggled with, as most oil painters do who work in more than one session. If you work alla prima, you never come across it. And a lot of the time I do, I do work alla prima, but I also increasingly now I'm working in multiple layers, and then you need to bear it in mind that it can be a problem. What about someone like Sadie who does layer after layer? She must oil out. I don't know the ins and outs of her technique, but she must oil out between layers. But there are also painters like Michael Klein. I've seen him paint on his videos a couple of times, and he doesn't oil out. I saw him do a live stream over 3 days of a flower painting, and he basically he painted the first part. He put a solvent wash down and painted the first part. Then he just carried on putting just neat paint on top of it. But he has a very distinctive surface to his paint. And I think that can look quite rough. If you're an incredibly good artist like he is, then I think you can make that roughness work for you. But for mere mortals like me, I don't like the effect so much. Yeah, maybe a Thursday night session, Loretta. That's a good idea. Maybe I should do a session on sinking in. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started with some painting. So if I'm looking at this, and I think yours will probably be fairly similar. So overall, like value-wise, this doesn't look too bad. shape-wise, it doesn't look too bad. I've got too much chroma here in the middle, and there's no detail. And I've got a bit too much chroma here. So these are the things that I'm looking at that are striking me straight away. And there's no light. We haven't gone right up into the lights of our lightest light. So I'm going to start off by putting in some of the highlights, so immediately establishing the full value range so we know where we're sitting. So the white flowers, this is this strip here, these colors on the palette. So if I get the lightest one, I'm going to save the very lightest value, titanium white, just for where I think I'm really going to need it. But you'll soon find, like, you don't need to use very thick paint at this point. And as you start to lay it down, to put the paint down, try to be really, really careful about the drawing and the edges. And you'll find that you can paint really, really subtly at this stage, because we're painting into an oil couch, and it quite often takes very little to make something feel like it's starting to come alive. So say, I'm going to start off very, very slowly to show you how I'd approach this stage, and then speed up a little bit. So this, looking at this one curled back petal up on the very left top of this rose here. The exposure on the panel is dark, is it? It could be, but wait and see until I've got the values in, because I haven't got the lightest values in yet, remember. It could be though, it could be a bit dark. I can certainly bring it up a little bit if we find that it's not. I generally try and match the backgrounds in value for the photo and the painting. But we'll see after I put the highlights in. So I'm going to paint this, just this bit here. Now it's not all in one sweep. There are two definite, it's articulated into two definite parts, this petal. And there's a hard edge on this side, on the left-hand side, where it's against the orange rose. Thankfully, we've already got that painted in there, so we can paint over it. And then we're soft edge on this side. So I would go in, try and paint it fairly accurately in terms of shape, make the hard edge on the outside, and then lift off the brush for the softer on the inside. Can you see, like, suddenly that's the lightest value on the whole painting. Okay. It doesn't have to be necessarily perfect. A perfect rendition of the shape that you see on the photo. I mean, that also is a personal aesthetic choice. But immediately that's changed things. You know, this is much higher value than the rest of the lights on the rose. Okay. So I'm going to try and roughly paint the shape of that highlight. Just putting the highlights in for now because it's going to redefine everything. So this curled back petal continues down the rose here. And this part here, it curls back more quickly because there's a dent in it here. So you only see a very small part of it here. It's very thin, the highlight there, just a little bit. And then it widens as it comes down, and this petal stops, like about down here. So I'm going to paint all of this highlight in. This is the bits of the painting that we didn't do before in the last session, which is where the rose is turning to the light. And immediately you can see that's redefined the whole rose. Just putting that in has redefined how you feel this. This feels more like shadow now. So the next petal along to the right, again the top left of the rose is here. Now don't paint the highlight of this petal right down into the rose here, because this is shadow. Just look for the very lightest parts, and you only see the light travels through this little crack here and comes out onto the petal there. And there's a very sharp edge right at the top of the rose there. But on the inside, this edge where it comes away from the light is soft, and the edge where it's against the green is hard. Remember from when we did the value studies how important that handling of edges was. to create the feeling of the form turning. Hard edges where the form is against the background, and then softer edges where it's turning slowly away from the light. Okay. So the next level of petals, if you like, coming into the rose are a little bit further in. We're just painting the highlights. That's all we're doing, just with that, the highlight colour. And the whole feeling of the rose changes. Do you feel, Mariana, let me know if you feel I should be bringing up the exposure of the panel now. Now that the lightest value is, I absolutely can do it, but I think it may have been partly because, well, entirely because we hadn't gone right up the value range in the paintings yet. And I will also do this sometimes, like I've got a slightly harder edge here than I want, so I'll smooth it with my finger, because you're painting into oil. If we weren't painting into oil, you couldn't paint these soft transitions, you just couldn't do it. So just look for all of the areas on your rose where the form is turned to the light. Remember, the light is coming from the left. So it's where the petals turn around. It's only around this side of the rose. None of this is really direct light over this side. It's just around this part. And there's 2-3 levels of petals there where it comes in. Try to be really careful with your drawing, because we want to get a more refined version of the rose now. But I love this stage of a painting because you've got all the hard work done, you know, and the little touches that you start to put in carefully, like each one should tell. Each one should be necessary at this point. There's no kind of, well, let's just try this and see how it goes. Each one should be thought about in terms of the form of the rose, because you've done that stage of getting the broad statement in. Now this is interesting, as this petal here, you might want to watch for a second, as this petal here travels down the rose towards the bottom. Because the light is coming down from this direction, there's only the very thinnest sliver of it coming down here that you can see that has direct light on it, just the slightest edge. And I would do that just by, not by painting it with a line, but by just putting the edge, just placing the edge of the brush. You get a much more convincing shape that way. Just place the edge of the brush and make a line. I haven't really done any painting yet. We're just painting in shapes of the lights, and already the rose is starting to appear. So anywhere you see direct light, there's a petal just under here. I've gone a little bit too low with that, so I'm going to wipe that back. Other beauty of painting into a couch is you can just wipe stuff off at this stage. Underneath this part here is another petal that just protrudes out into the light, so the edge of the petal is hard, and where it goes back into shadow is soft. I'm going to get another brush and soften the edge where it's going back into the shadow. Hard and soft edges are just, they're so crucial with flowers in showing the form. It's like, I mean, the biggest problem with flowers is taking the complexity and simplifying it. The second biggest problem, I think, is the edges. They really do take some focus and care. But if you can, even if you paint it very loosely, the edges are still really important, just the same as values are really important, even if you paint loosely. This bottom petal here, the bottom left of the rose, again, it's only the edge, really, which is direct light that curls round to the light. It's almost like you're drawing with light. And all of this is really thin, so I just do it with dabs of the brush. Can you see how like putting this line down here makes this suddenly feel like shadow? This for me is the most beautiful rose in the whole setup. It just has so much mystery about it. And again, this petal on the far left, just the very edge of it is curling out enough to hit the light and have direct light on it. All the rest of it is in shadow with transmitted light coming through it, so it's a lower value. It's got to be a lower value. So this is the rule for this bit. We're getting our lightest, almost our lightest light, and we're only painting the parts that have direct light on them. Everything else is lower value. And it's kind of handy in a way that we've done it this way without actually painting in any of the lights the first time, in order to make sure that we could use an oil couch this session, because it also means that you just make sure that anything else that you paint is lower value than what you're putting in now. The very top of the rose here, this petal here just curls back, and just the very top of it, really thin line, curls round enough to hit the light, and you can use your brush. I'm not painting exactly what's there, but I'm using what's there as a cue for what I do paint. Okay. We've done very little, but already it has more light in it. And I'm going to put in, at this point, I'm going to take that same colour and I'm going to put in the very lightest part of this rose behind it. So I've got an idea in terms of value where that's going to be. Unfortunately, in the photo, this light shape and the rose behind it to the right is it's overexposed, so there's no detail there, which is a shame. Just to put that in, so it's kind of, and if you squint down now, the whole value balance is different. I'm not going to put anything on this rose. As I said, I think this is the least important rose, the one on the far left at the top, the white rose. So I'd be inclined to do that at the end. I'm much more feeling these three, and especially these two, as being the important ones. Chat box has gone really quiet. Everyone must be really busy carefully painting their petals. So squint, it's the law, okay? It's the law that you have to squint all the time. If you don't squint, the painting police are going to come around and arrest you. You always need to be remembering to squint. No matter how complicated the little bit that you're doing is, keep stopping, pull your head back and squint. Just keep checking that. And it will show you areas where you might have missed, where there's some direct light that you didn't paint that you need to put in. You can start to work in some of the complexity as you move in towards the rose, towards the center of the rose. And really, I mean, you know, the less you paint, the better at this stage. It doesn't take much. It really doesn't take much to start to create more of the form. All we're painting is a new area of light, the highlight, and it's creating the impression of form. as you come down here towards the center of the rose, the values are dropping slightly. Suddenly that bright, very light, high value color looks too bright. And for me personally, at this stage, I take the utmost care over every mark. We've worked so hard on these paintings already, to get to this point. By all means, paint with a kind of a freedom and expression, if you like. But still, be very careful about each mark that you make. Think about each mark. Kathy says, I don't have enough value hue in some of the petals on the light side. So when I put this light value down, you can't see it in some spots. Do I correct this when it's dry? I think what you mean, Kathy, is that as you put this value down, some parts of the painting are about the same value already. Is that right, if that's what you're saying? If that's right, so it's not really showing. If that's right, then what I would do is put them down anyway, put the lights down anyway, and start to paint in the shadows. I'm going to do that next anyway, on this rose here. I'm going to start painting the areas where we're in shadow, but the light is traveling through it. So you'll want to paint those areas and bring the value down a bit there. Definitely do it while it's wet, because you won't be able to smooth the edges effectively when it's dry. And the edges really are the most important part of what we're doing. Right, yeah. So no, do it now. In a second, I'm going to get on to painting these shadow areas with transmitted light, and you want to bring the value down a little bit there. Your approach will be slightly different. What we have here on the palette, basically, even with just these two strips of color here, is huge amounts of careful control of the chroma by mixing in. We can drop chroma really carefully by mixing in our low chroma colors here, and of the value from dark to light. We have really careful control. All I've used so far is these colors up here. I've gone a little bit down as I was coming into the center of the rose. I brought in a little bit of this next color down, this kind of strip. For the white roses, I brought a little bit of that up to mix between them, but that's it. Over on this side of the center, on the right side of the center of the rose, there are some petals there that are almost reaching towards the light, but they don't have full light on them as much as the ones over on the left. So you drop the value there before you put those in. I'm going to be very careful here because there's something that happened on my painting here that I really like. I've got some streaks down here and I want to put these petals in, but I also want to be able to see the streaks. So I'm just going to try and do it very gently and not completely obliterate those streaks. See that the value that I've just put in there was too light. Can you see that? It's a value mistake. You might want to have a look at this. This petal that I put in here, if I squint down, that stands out way more than the petal on the photo does. So even though I dropped the value down to about here, it wasn't enough. So I'm going to wipe it out and paint it again with a much lower value. It's low chroma because it's almost direct light, but it's much lower value than I thought it was. Try again. That's more like it. So I'm just painting the highlights the highlights are a lower value on this side of the rose, and I'm leaving the areas in between. The shadows between the petals are what's already there, the paint that's already there underneath. So I'm kind of painting these petal shapes on top of what's already there. There's a really fascinating painting by Rubens called Samson and Delilah in the National Gallery in London. And he has done almost exactly this on the cloth, especially on Delilah's arm. And he paints very streaky kind of underpaintings. And then he paints the lights over the top and allows the streaky underpainting underneath to create the shadow. Samson and Delilah by Rubens. I first noticed that many, many years ago, and it's affected how I paint ever since. It's incredibly well done. So it has a streaky kind of warm underpainting like this, and then he paints the lights over the top. And when you see it close up, it looks like abstract shapes. And when you stand back, it just kind of goes and gels into fabric around her arm. It's amazing. Samson and Delilah by Rubens. I think it's called Samson and Delilah. The subject matter is definitely Samson and Delilah. And he does it on the flesh as well. Really amazing painter. Is anyone else having... Kathy says she's losing connection. The connection looks fine from me here. YouTube is saying it's excellent. It may be your internet connection there, Kathy, maybe, especially if you've got high pressure and bad weather. I don't know, might affect it perhaps. Let me know, anybody else, if you're having a bit of a problem with internet connection as well, with the speed of the stream. It looks like it's fine from my side. I'm not seeing any drops. Thankfully, I did have a problem last week with the internet connection, but it seems much better now. Great, thank you. I think it's probably your side, Kathy, I'm afraid. So let me know when you're ready to move on, and we'll start painting in some of the lighter shadow areas. Because your painting is probably like mine. The paint is quite thin and kind of scrubbed in. So we want to, just in places, we want to kind of try and sort some of that out. Can you see how much this flower is standing out against these dark greens now? You know, it's from planning the values from the start. Knowing that there was just that little bit of bandwidth, if you like, in the lights that we still had that we could bring in. And you could probably quite happily, you know, not paint an awful lot more than this on this rose. But I'm going to work into it a bit further, because I think there's quite a bit more that we can do yet. So just let me know when you feel ready to move on. After this rose, I'm going to do a little bit more on these lighter parts. Then I'm going to do a little bit more in the shadow and in the middle, and then we're going to quickly rough in this rose at the top just to get the value balance, and then we're going to move on to the orange rose. You know you're looking forward to that orange rose. It's going to be a lot of fun. Don't worry, it'll be fine. You've all painted it before. Except that we did it in one go before, and it's kind of, in a lot of ways, I think it's easier to do it like this, you know, because you're less rushed. And it always amazes me, like when you work on something in a couple of layers like this, how little you have to do to start kind of really create a feeling of form. But it's all down to mostly down to the values in the edges. So just pop a quick note in the chat when you're ready for the next bit, and I'll do the next bit. It's also worth noting that the bit that I've just put in is that there's a couple of other edges that are fairly sharp. But because you've got such a wide value difference between the light side of this rose on the left and the very dark leaves behind, the edges seem sharper. You know, you've got a hard edge and a sharp value contrast. That's the painting. That is the one. Yeah. I only just saw the bottom of it pop up in the chat, but that's the painting, yeah. And it's on, thanks Heather. It's on Delilah's arm, in the cloth on her arm, the white cloth. If you can actually get onto the National Gallery website, and you can zoom right into a ridiculous amount, and you can actually see it on the photo of the painting. You zoom right in, and he's done a similar thing on Samson's body. So if you look at his leg, which is sticking right out towards the right there, all of the leg in shadow is underpainting, just like how a rose is. And then he's brought in the white and the more careful modeling where it comes out into the light. And it all gels at this size. But when you see it in front of you, this is a huge painting. I mean, it's huge, you know. I don't know how high it is, maybe 6 foot high or something like that. When you see it in the flesh, it's just astounding because you can really see what he's done. He's like Veronese as well, who and also Velázquez, or Velázquez, however you're supposed to pronounce it. You look up close and you see abstract shapes and you can see all of the technique. If you move back across the room, it all gels into an illusion of reality. Your computery skills are going great, Heather. I'm very impressed. I wish I'd thought of doing that. That painting was actually formative for me, seeing that technique, seeing it and then reading up about it and trying to learn about it and how he'd done it was quite formative for me when I was learning to paint. Okay, so let's move on to these areas where we're in shadow, but we've got a little bit of reflected light coming through. Now we need to be careful here, okay, because we've got a very nice effect going on, so you don't want to overpaint this bit. But if I take this bit of this petal that I started on originally, the petal on the left of the white rose right at the top, it's much smoother and it's lower chroma where it turns into the shadow, okay? So what I would want to be using there is we have really fine control over our chroma here with our value scale on the left made from raw umber and white. You need to be very, very careful of the values, but I'm going to bring in a bit of this very, very low chroma, okay? In terms of in Munsell terms, these weren't mixed to any Munsell scale, but in Munsell terms, I reckon the chroma here is about 1. And that's almost entirely the raw umber and white mix I picked up there. And I'm just going to bring it in. Hopefully the value is not too dark. I'm painting quite thinly. Chroma is too low. I'm going to bring in a little bit of the color next to it that has a little bit more, a little bit of this yellow next to it, that pre-mixed yellow that has a bit more chroma. And I'm going to paint it in it's thin. The paint is pretty thin, you know. And then I'm going to wipe off the brush. You would have seen me do this lots of times. Because we're painting wet into wet, we can effectively, because of the couch, we can handle, you see this hard transition that I've just painted there? This wants to be really soft. So, I mean, you could paint intermediate values, brush across it, whatever you want, but I find this hatching across it very carefully. And then getting a soft dry brush and dragging across very, very lightly will make a nice soft edge there. And if you don't like it, I'm actually quite happy with that. I think it came out fine, but for sake of argument, say you didn't like that, just wipe it out and do it again, you know. Or if you feel that it made it too smooth, wipe it out. You know, I mean, that looks fine to me. I just put it on and then wiped it out. That looks fine to me too. It's all about just being really, really careful and really deliberate and thinking about what you're doing, you know. Think about every stroke. So I'm going to bring this shadow side all the way down so I can have a really nice, I mean, there's a beautiful, that's too dark. Oops. It's obviously getting lighter. Like, this is what I call like, I think of these as value swear words. This mark that I put down there, it's like so out of place. It draws attention. It shouldn't be there. It's wrong. The value is wrong. It needs to be much lighter and more subtle. So I'm mixing it up into the very lightest color that I've mixed here. So I can make a much more subtle transition there. It actually gets really close to the color of the light as it goes down here. And then this transition needs to be, it's harder up here at the top, and then it's softer as it goes down. So I make the hatches wider. And you can drag along it with a soft brush or with the same brush. And just work around the petals that we've already painted, doing the same thing. So like this petal on the top, the very top on the left, the right hand side, sorry, wants to be a little bit darker there. Right on the corner. Just look at the values that you can see, because they're telling you what's happening to the form. And it's lower chroma at the top, where there's not much transmitted light, and lower value. And then as this petal curls around, it goes slightly lighter and a little bit more chroma at the bottom. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of the lightest light mixed with a little bit of the color underneath, because remember, we don't want to go up as high in value as the lightest light. It's got to stay lower in value. Everything has to be lower in value, and you can just delicately sweep it in. Start to create that feeling of translucency in the light coming through. You know, if you can paint like just a few strokes that describe the form, then do it. And if you put those few strokes down and they don't seem to be working, my advice would be at this stage is not to keep on putting on more paint and paint over them and try and make them work, would be to wipe them out and try them again until you feel you've got it right. But we're basically mostly dropping chroma here. So if you want to, let me show you I want to show you the palette. This is so important to the way I deal with color when I'm painting, especially flowers. I think it would probably be the same if you were painting people too, similarly subtle. But here is the color. This is the strip for the flowers, okay? We haven't got down into the shadows yet. Might not even use these colors today. if I want to drop the chroma around this value, then I just bring in some of this lower chroma. If I put that down and the chroma is too low, I can wipe it out and then bring in a little bit more of this. What I effectively have is a chroma scale going from left to right at the same value. Okay, and here I have a value scale going up and down. A high chroma value scale here, relatively, and a very low chroma value scale here. So I've incredible, just within this area here, I have incredible control over the colors that go down. So if something doesn't look right, then you can go back to the palette and adjust and then try again. And don't be afraid to wipe it off if you feel it's not quite right. So I'm gradually now going to work further into the rows, just doing the same thing, basically, looking at what's there, trying to get the values right and the chroma right, and painting the shadow sides of these petals. We've done the light, so this is just lower chroma. Lower value and lower chroma. But try not to be too heavy-handed and overpaint all of it, because you want some of that higher chroma painting underneath showing through. So Kathy, at this point, you want to be thinking about making sure that the shadows that you paint in are lower value than your lights, so you can start to paint in your shadows if they're not low enough in value. So this is also the point at which you start making corrections for anything that you weren't quite happy with the first time round. From the last session, And I really think when you're painting flowers like this, it's key to have this like really, really fine control over the color. If you don't have to paint them carefully like this. You can paint them more expressively, but the value and the color needs to be right. And some painters do push the chroma, like Daniel Keyes. I think he's a brilliant painter. That's in no way a criticism of his work. I think he's fantastic. But he does push the chroma quite a lot. It's an aesthetic choice. It wouldn't be my choice, but I think his paintings are beautiful. If you look at, say, Kathy Speranza's flower paintings, I mean, she'll be basically doing this. She'll have areas that are incredibly carefully painted, and then she'll take an area and put some kind of layers over it. I don't know in detail how she does it, but she puts layers over it and obscures the form in some parts and gets this incredibly beautiful feeling of, in some places the painting is disappearing, and in some places it's incredibly carefully painted. And I've never asked her this. I keep meaning to ask her, but I have a feeling that what she sometimes does is paint something very carefully, and then in subsequent layers after it's dry, paint over it and obscure it. So you just get an impression of these layers, If you look at someone like Michael Klein, then he's not painting into a couch like this. He's not using this kind of method. He's much more direct, and allows the paint to describe the form a lot more. He puts down like exactly the color that he wants, and the textures build up, I'm trying to think of any other really good flower painters that I love. Katie Whipple. I think she paints a lot like this. But I have a feeling that she paints kind of sequentially, because she paints, as far as I'm aware, exclusively from life. So she would have an idea for a composition and would perhaps have to switch out some of these roses, like for other ones if they died. Again, I don't know in detail what her technique is. But I'm pretty sure she paints like a flower in a day kind of thing. From a brief Facebook conversation I had with her once about how she paints. But it all comes back to the same basic things: values, edges, and chroma. So for me, this area of this petal down here has become heavy and ugly, this transition here. So I want to soften that, and this value also needs to come up. And when you're painting into a couch, you can just do the most gentle changes to sort that out. Those little bits where you feel the value is slightly wrong and you kind of need to make a correction. Okay. Elizabeth Burden, her name rings a bell. Oh, Sherry, thank you. I didn't know she did that. I didn't know she sanded off. Who else does that? I think a lot of painters do, actually, but I forget his name. Hopefully it'll come back to me later. So how is this feeling to you? Let me know how it feels to you to work like this. Does it feel very alien? Does it feel like it's working? Is it very different to how you would normally paint? Is it slower? Is it quicker? Let me know how it feels to you to paint this way. Like in multiple layers like this, where you almost are anticipating in the first painting where you're going to go next. In the first session, you're anticipating, what's going to happen next and how you're going to do it. Thank you, Andor. I'll look her up, Elizabeth Burden. Okay, for me at this point, I'm fairly happy with how this side of the rose is looking, so I wouldn't work on it much more than that. I think that's fine. The feeling of light is there and there are enough petals. So the next bit I would be moving on to is this shadow area around this side here. Stephen Assail, how did you know, Blake? That's who I was thinking of. You must be psychic or something. Stephen Assail sands off whole areas of his paintings and then repaints them. Alien, Franchetta says it's alien but interesting, Marianne says. Yeah. And you should never trust your painting. I seriously believe you shouldn't. I've got paintings that I hate, that I really don't think worked out at all, but there's always something you can learn from them, and if you get rid of them, I kind of think it's almost like you scrub over the opportunity for learning. It's good sometimes, I think, when you're clearing out and tidying up, to find them, to go back and find them and think, oh yeah, of course, this is what I got wrong there. This is what I should have done. You can always wipe out some of it now if you feel that it's a bit difficult. Then it's not what you've done so far hasn't worked so well. You just need to work very slowly and very carefully, really, and just, as I say, be very careful about each mark as it goes down. Candy says it's alien and slower. Yeah. I mean, I don't know of a way of painting flowers fast and having them work out. I think you can paint flowers so that it looks like you painted them fast. But if anything, you need to go even more slowly when you do that. Yeah, look at it as a learning experience. Don't forget that you've got access to this, all of these videos and the photos and everything forever, basically. So you can try running through this as often as you like. You can try doing it with other subjects that you find yourself, It just struck me actually as I was saying that it might be a nice idea if I posted some more photos of flowers that have been taken quite carefully, My setup's here for you to practice with if you want to do some more, If you wipe it out very heavily, you may need to put on a little bit more oil. Might need a little bit more oil, otherwise you might find that you're working kind of with dry paint, which you don't really want. Some reference photos, yeah. Let me make a note to myself so I don't forget. About now is probably a good time to be having a break because we've been going for about an hour. That's brilliant to hear, Sharon. Sharon says, I like it. It's very different, but I like it. It's great. Oh, he's all right. He's in now. Susan, he's okay. He's been let in and he's fallen asleep next to the radiator. He's all right. He's back in. He's a very old fella, and if I leave him out too long, his legs seize up and he can't walk properly because it's really cold at the moment out there. I think, Candy, that's a really good point. Candy says, I just tried to work out my drawing more. I think I should have continued on it after the last course, so I would not be having so much trouble. I think one of the values of experiences like this, even though it can be difficult sometimes, is that it can show you areas where you would benefit from a bit more practice. And that's a good thing. It's certainly nothing, to be frustrated by. I understand, it can be really frustrating sometimes to find that you're not getting what you want out of it. Believe me, I know that feeling only too well. But I think, as you say, you feel that you would benefit from more work on your drawing, and that's a really useful insight. And it doesn't have to be a grind, and it doesn't have to be horrible and oppressive. You can just put aside 15 to 30 minutes a day to do some drawing accuracy exercises, and you might find that it's really therapeutic and you really enjoy it. Jan, that's hilarious. Well, I'm sure it wasn't hilarious at the time. But transparent red oxide is horrendous. I got it on one of my tops, light grey top, years ago, and it's still there. Basically, it's never going to go. Okay, so let's have a quick 10-minute break. Grab a cup of tea or whatever you want. We'll start back again in 10 minutes, and then we'll work the shadow area of this rose, and we'll go into the centre. And then we'll perhaps do a little bit on this rose at the top and move straight onto the big orange rose. Yeah, Dana, everything Kathleen does is amazing as far as I'm concerned. She just has something that's really hard to define going on in her work. Okay, I'm going to switch the mic off and go and grab a cup of tea. We'll be back very shortly. 10-minute break. Yes, I would agree with that. The student book, the new one, the 6th edition, which is just out, looks really good from what I've seen so far, from what people have told me. The chips, the little colour chips are different. They're not stuck together, so they don't destroy themselves when you try and peel them apart. But yes, Heather's right. The big book is a huge commitment. You're talking about £1,000. But I will say this about that book. I mean, what's going on here in the colour is come directly from that book. Yes, they do differ. I would go for the 6th edition now. 6th edition looks good. It's the latest one, about $100, I think. The big book, I mean, if you break it down, like I've had mine for over 10 years, so it's cost me about £100 a year, about £10 a month, a little less than £10 a month. To have that amount of money and to spend it in one go, yes, it's a lot. But I think it's no exaggeration to say that working with that book has taught me colour. It's a bit like, I mean, it doesn't, you have to work with it. The way that I work with it mostly is by using the chips to find the local colours of things. And then learning about light and shadow, using it to learn about light and shadow, and the way that hues change as the colour goes into the shadow, the way that chromas change and value changes. It's basically, I think of it as a map of the colour space of paint. Obviously, I've got on very well with it, and I like what it's the kind of the method that I've evolved of working with it. I like very much, and it's shown me a lot about colour that I don't believe I could have learned any other way. For sure. I mean, what we're doing here, we've got value from light to dark, and we've got chroma from low chroma to higher chroma. This is Munsell, basically. We're not using Munsell chips, although I know some of you are. I'm not using Munsell chips to paint this, but the knowledge that I'm applying, the colour knowledge that I'm applying, and the sensitivity that I've developed over the years to getting the chroma and the value right around these areas of the painting, that's all come from Munsell. I couldn't have done it without it. But it is a lot of money. It's a lot to pay all at once. But it demystifies colour, and I'm a big fan of anything that demystifies something. I've always found it really frustrating from when I first started. I decided about 15, probably more, like 17 years ago, to really commit to learning to be the best painter that I could for the rest of my life. I found a lot of the resources that I found online then, and there wasn't that many, a lot of them seemed to be going out of their way to mystify things and obfuscate things in order to make people believe that they had some kind of special knowledge. I hate this word secret, the secrets of the old masters. There are no secrets about how they worked. There's no secret that you can learn which is going to make you a better painter. It's out and open and obvious. It's practice makes you better. Practice and knowledge makes you better. It's a hard truth, but it's the only way to improve. Sherry says you have 2 classes on Munsell. What's the difference? Oh, you mean the online colour courses? Right. There is 2, but the mixing one is like a subset of the big one. So the big one is you've got to get a load of cubes and spheres and paint them. And all of the mastering mixing course it's like a part of the main course. So if you do the mastering mixing course, it's for people who might not want to go straight in, and pay like $200 for a colour course. You might want to try it out a little bit first with the mixing course, which is a lot cheaper. And if you do that and then you want the colour course afterwards, then I take the price of the mixing course off the colour course. So it doesn't matter which way you do it. You don't have to commit as much if you do the mixing one first. I'm actually in the process of rethinking the colour course because my teaching has evolved a little bit over the last kind of 5 years or so since I made it. So I'm going to be adding some more stuff to it soon. So anyone who's bought it already will get all of the new stuff too. You know, you basically get lifetime access. It's just a case of finding the time to do it. But Big Lad, you all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the next part of the painting. I'm going to move into the shadow area here, and there's very, very little to do. So we're going to do the shadow area here, then the middle. Now this part here, all I really want to do is to bring in some of those slightly lighter areas, and they're lower chroma, and the value is almost the same as what I have. So I'm going to mix a lower chroma color, and I'm going to just put a little bit down. See, I know most of the value is around here on my palette. This is why I love setting out palettes like this. I know that this color here is pretty much that color there. So I want something that's lower chroma and slightly lighter. Okay, so I can mix it on the palette. I can see it here, you know, and then I ought to be able to just carefully, hopefully, put it down, and it should come out just about right. Lower chroma, slightly higher value. Pretty much exactly what I wanted, you know. That's why the real value of laying out colors very carefully like this. Just slightly lighter and slightly lower chroma. And that's what it takes to give you they're just like, you know, I hardly painted anything there. And then right on the outside edge of this flower, it gets just a little bit lower in value and a little bit darker. So I've just gone in. Maybe that is too much, that's too dark, but I can brush it in. Might have to wipe it, but I'll try brushing it out a little bit and see if we can get away with it. And spreading it out a little. You can do, with a couch as well, you can do a lot of control like on the painting after you've got the paint on there. But that's fine, you know, I wouldn't be bothered, you know, really about putting in any more than that. Just, that's all it took, you know, to do this area here. We're just suggesting stuff. We don't have to paint it all. In fact, I think it's better that you don't. You know, like my painting here is obviously taking its cue from the photo, but I'm not painting every petal that I can see in the photo. As soon as I feel like I've got the feeling of light and shadow and there's some beauty there, I stop and I move on to the next bit before I mess it up, you know, by trying to paint too much detail. In here, there's quite a lot of complexity, but we've already got our rich, warm shadow color. So, and that's here, that's around this value here. So if I go in with slightly lighter and lower chroma, I can just suggest those kind of swirls inside in a very abbreviated form. And I won't need to do much more than that. You know, I'm a big fan of getting away with the absolute minimum that you can get away with, the minimum amount of painting. It's almost like, you know, it means that there's less chance of making really horrible mistakes. But seriously, I do think there's something, a lot to be said actually, for painting things, for what the word I generally use for it is brevity. Like not overdoing it, you know. I think if you try, for me anyway, this is my personal feeling, if you try to paint every single little detail, you end up moving further away from what you want. In a lot of ways, I think like in the same way that a lot of painters are, that aren't really called that, I'm kind of an impressionist really. Like Velázquez was an impressionist, you know. He painted the visual effect rather than every detail. And broadly speaking, I would say I'm not for a moment saying I'm in that league, but I'm going for a similar kind of thing. So that's it. That's all I would do to finish that rose. Just bring in some, just if the touches are the right value and the right chroma, you can put just a few touches down and leave it alone, and it will be fine. Stand back, squint, constantly. Stand back, squint. It's the law. Make small adjustments be very careful about them too. It's so easy to overdo something. The last thing that I would want to do with this rose here is the petal that sticks out to the left. It's really interesting. It's very beautiful on the actual rose, and it goes slightly green. It goes slightly green now. So if I get a low chroma of about the right value, you can test it and see if you've got the value about right. That's a bit dark. And I'm going to bring in a little bit of the green gold. And this is what happens a lot with roses as they move out towards the leaves. So can you see that? I'm just getting like a light value here on the palette, and I'm bringing in a little touch of the green gold, which is bringing it just the right, it's quite high chroma, it's bringing in just about the right color, and you can just kind of sweep in a little bit of that gently, and it just brings in that kind of reflected green there. That the light traveling through that green, it brings in just that little bit of extra chroma. A little bit of a deeper shadow there at the edge where the petal meets the rose, and you're basically done. Debbie, yeah, you were just thinking that, right? I leave little touches like that because they're so easy to do. If you've got the rest of it right. And I would actually be quite happy like that. There's more detail you could put in, like you can put in this area of this little band of light that goes down it there. You can put that in if you want, but you don't need it to make that sing, Excuse me. Excuse me. I'm struggling a little bit now. The rose done. Personally, I wouldn't paint it any more than that. If you see this, when I photograph it and post it in the group, you'll see that this is actually, it's quite roughly painted when you see it up close, but from a distance, it fools you into thinking that more has been painted than has actually been done. I think I'm basically a lazy painter. I just want to create the effect of the form without having to paint every little bit. The effect of the light. We don't paint things, we paint light. Okay, so I feel that this rose at the top right does need a little bit of sorting out, but not very much. I don't want to paint this rose too much. I just want to put in the main forms, really. So I'm going to put in the lights. I'm going to go do like a really quick version of what I did on this one, on the one that we've just painted, just to create more of the impression of the form without spending an age over it. No, so I'm just painting the lights. I'm doing the same thing as we just did. I'm just painting the light parts with the highest value. But I'm being much less careful about it. I just want this rose just to kind of be a foil to this one, just to sit in the right place in the value range, really. And what's interesting about the way I've painted mine, yours may not be like this. You've got to look at yours and make your decisions really at this point for what you feel your rose needs. But my rose is certainly I've got way too much chroma here, and in fact there's so much chroma there that I feel like it's arguing with the flower that I just painted at the front in a way. It's like it's stealing its attention. It's most rude. So after I've painted in the lights, I'm going to drop the chroma of this bit here, and I'm just by painting over it with a lower chroma color. I'm not going to do much more on this rose here. For now, I may decide to go back to it, would possibly decide to go back to it at a later date. But at this point, I just want to, I've put the lights in, going much more quickly now. So then I put the shadows, the light low chroma shadows behind the lights, still leaving the high chroma in the shadow. I'm going to address that in a moment. We're just trying to create the form with as little work as possible. And this, like stuff like this, I really love. Like you see this bit here, there's a bit, this petal here at the top is in direct light. And then it goes into shadow. So it goes lower chroma. This is an actual shadow. But then here, in this part here, there's light traveling through the petal underneath. So you don't need to necessarily paint that light there. You need to paint the shadow that shows it's there, the beginning of the shadow. And that's enough to show that you have light traveling through it. So these are the low chroma shadow areas, just like we painted around the left-hand side of this rose here, keeping the values really high, trying not to overdo it. There's one of my value swear words I was talking about earlier on, like an entirely wrong. Gonna have to wipe it. This bit here, way too dark and in the wrong place. Wasn't thinking about what I was doing. So this area, this whole area here is too much chroma. So I'm going to use, the value is good, but the chroma is too high. So I'm going to paint into it with lower chroma, just to kind of push this rose here back. There's an area, like there's a strip right down here, like this rose is basically like a cone with the petals around it. It's like a cone in a saucer. And there's an area at the edge of the cone where you have got that low chroma. So I'm going to leave that and I'm going to paint the lower chroma areas around it. So I end up with this lower chroma bit down here, which hopefully will show that that's being pulled back into the inside of the rose. It's the minimum, just trying to paint the minimum. I actually need a little bit more chroma right in, and lower value right in the center, the top center of the rose here. I'm going to bring in a little bit more. Bring the value down and a little bit more chroma there. I have so much control with the paints laid out like this. You need to be able to see what you need to change though, you know, which isn't always easy. And honestly, I think a lot of that, you know, it's drawing practice. Drawing practice really helps. Value studies. Like I would say, value studies just like more important than anything. They teach you to paint. And this outside petal on the left-hand side is the same as the one on the bottom rose. It goes slightly green. I already have a color for that, so I can just paint that in. I wouldn't do more than that on that rose. I really don't think it needs it. You know, it's really just a foil to this rose. Don't want to be showing a lot of detail up there really, because it's just going to, for me, it would just detract. But again, it's, you know, if you like paintings that are worked at the same level right across the surface, then do them that way. All these things, I feel that generally artists say this is how you do it. You know, they're aesthetic choices. What you don't want to find is to be in a situation where you're being held back by a lack of skill. And it has to be said, you do find that sometimes people will make excuses for a lack of skill and saying, well, that's how I like to paint, that's how I see it. You know, and that's an unfortunate and unnecessary place to be, I think. But whether you paint like with a lot of brevity or whether you paint very highly finished work is really, it's personal aesthetic choice. If you like very expressive brush marks, if you like really high chroma colors, these things are not wrong. You know, they're just how you like to paint. In my opinion, I should say. You know, it's just my opinion. So this is like a broken down fast version of what we did very carefully on this main rose, because this main rose is important, this one not so much. So let me know when you're ready and we'll move on to the orange rose. We'll make some headway on the orange rose in the next probably half hour or so. Maybe we'll probably do about another half an hour on the orange rose and then finish this session. The orange rose also isn't going to need too much work. I really feel, for me personally, this painting, the rose at the bottom right, at the front, is the one. It's the rosebud at the center of the story. Thanks, Loretta. Thank you. You see, I think a lot of it as well is if you think about the way your brain works visually, because this one was quite carefully painted, and the light and the shadow was quite carefully handled, you can get away with a lot more on this one, you know. You don't have to paint the detail because you've told the story of how the light is working in this one, so the next rose up you can be a lot more general about it. And it will fool your brain into believing that you've painted a lot more than you actually have up there. I'm going to bring in, just on the outside edges, I'm going to bring in that lower value just to the right on the right hand side of this rose, because I feel like that's kind of compositionally, I think it's kind of I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's going to help the composition to have these slightly darker values right on the right hand side, help the subject spread across the whole of the painting. I've just tapped them in and now I'm going to smooth them. So I wanted sharp edges on the outside and soft on the inside. I've overdone it here, but I actually like it. I don't think it's a swear word. I think it's like it's just an emphasis. The slightly dark value here, I kind of like. But I don't want to fuss anymore with that rose. Okay, so pop a quick note in the chat when you're ready to move on, and we'll go on to our orange cup. And don't forget also that we've got one more session after this. But I don't know about you, but oh, you want that little one? Okay. I looked at my painting when I got it out today to start working on it in this session. And I thought that the leaves were going to need quite a bit of work because they were too rough. But I find now, looking at it, that since these flowers have been painted, actually they're probably going to be fine. And I probably won't do anything more on them at all. And be quite happy with them just kind of really roughly painted in like that. Because you don't really look at them, you look at the flowers, you know. I've just thought, actually, I think I forgot to post my stage 1 in the group. Can anyone remember if I did or didn't post my stage 1? I don't think I even have a photo of it. I can probably find a way to grab it off the video one way or another. Should think so anyway. So at the moment, I'm standing right back to look at mine. I'm literally on the other side of the room from it. I'm probably about 15 feet away. Looks fine from back here. It's slightly rough, really close up. I'll post. I'll try to remember when I post this in the group tomorrow to post some real close-ups so you can see the marks and see how rough it looks close up. I did forget. I thought I did. Yeah. No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I did forget. Yeah. That's an interesting question. Susan says you talk about how your painting has changed substantially over the last year, and can you talk about that a bit? It's so hard to put into words, really. I'm not even sure myself always, but I think I've slowed down a lot. I used to feel that I needed to be churning paintings out more, and I used to do a lot more paintings in a single session. And my goal, if you like, was to finish a painting in one go. And I would be very pleased if I got a decent result and I finished a painting in one go, partly because I liked the immediacy and partly because I just liked the philosophy of alla prima. And, you know, also if you're auctioning your work, you know, and you're trying to make a living, then I was kind of caught up in that, almost like the painting a day sort of. I wasn't doing a painting a day, but I was almost caught up in that way of looking at it. But I feel now, as I've gradually slowed down, I'm teaching a lot more than I'm painting now, except of course that I paint when I teach. But I'm finding now that when I come to do my own painting, I want to go slower. And sometimes I'll leave them stand for a week or two before I go back to them. And it feels right to me. It just feels more like me. It's almost like I feel like I've been trying to paint a little bit like somebody else too much. And I feel like I'm finding more where I want to go personally. I don't know if all that sounds pretentious nonsense, but that's kind of how I'm feeling about it now. Really, I feel like I'm finding my feet a little bit more. Does that help at all? I don't know. So it's not so much about adding more detail, it's just about mostly about working more slowly more than anything else. And I'm finding resonances between what I do now and what I used to do years and years and years ago before I gave up painting when I was in my kind of early 20s, I suppose. The stuff that I used to really enjoy was slow, careful work, creating light and really subtle, beautiful colours. I've always loved that, and I kind of feel like I'm going back to that more now. Thank you, Susan. That's a lovely thing to say. Yeah, Loretta says teaching can help reflect on your practice. That is so true. I honestly feel I learn more teaching than I do just painting. You know, teaching has taught me so much. Okay, we should really think about getting onto our orange rose. I'm going to have to put you down, little man. I'm sorry. I know you don't want to go down. It's like a part of it is just, I don't know, I really hope this doesn't sound pretentious, but it's letting go of the stuff that you were trying to deliberately do and allowing the stuff that feels natural to you to come out, even though you feel like a pressure to work in a different way. You know, like for a long time I felt a pressure to work in a very, like across the whole painting, in a very loose and expressive way, and that was real painting. And now that I'm letting go of that a little bit, I find that actually working on things for more than one session and having some parts that are really loose and broad and some parts that are really slow and careful, it kind of feels right to me. It just feels right. You know, I like the contrast of it in the paintings, and I don't know. It just feels more, it feels right. I really think, you know, you've just got to go with I think a lot of it is temperament. But it's difficult, you know, because we see so much art these days and so much of it is amazing. You know, there are some really amazing painters out there. I've been painting flowers a lot lately, and for about a year. Last year, I decided I journal every morning. I would sit down, spend an hour or so on my own, get up really early with a book, and I write really slowly and just write. And I wrote a long time ago, beginning of last year, that I really wanted to be, excuse me, an excellent flower painter. I'm not there yet, but I'm still working on it. You know, I haven't given up. I'm going to carry on working on it. You know, and then so I started looking at a lot of flower painters, really, really closely. Even buying their courses to find out how they worked. And you know, it's hard sometimes. You know, you're deeply impressed by somebody's work. It's difficult not to find yourself, to an extent, trying to do what they do, which is obviously, it's the wrong, you don't want to do that, but at the same time, it's quite a good thing in some ways, I think, to work through. Because it does teach you something, and then you learn something of their approach, and then you take it back, and eventually you kind of bed it down into your own. And it becomes a part of what you do without actually being what they do. So it's not necessarily something to be consciously avoided. I'm not sure you can avoid it, you know. For a long time, I was obsessed with Michael Klein's painting. I just wanted to paint like Michael Klein, you know. It's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to be able to paint flowers as good as Michael Klein. But he has a different aesthetic, you know, he has a different philosophy. He's, you know, it's, that's not really, it's ended up being not really what I want to do. I still love his work. And there's probably elements of at least me trying to do what he does that's still left in what I do now. Katie Whipple. You know, when I first came across Katie Whipple, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was like, that's flower painting. I've got to learn how to paint like that. You know, that's how you paint flowers. So I did a few paintings in a row that were very, very influenced by the way she paints, or at least the look of her painting, you know. Completely floored by it. I mean, her work is so beautiful, but at the end of the day, it's not me. You know. And I came through that. I learned something from it for sure, that goes into everything that I do now, you know. But sometimes I've just got to make a mark that I want to let the brush speak is the best way I've found to explain it. I like that tension between something being very resolved and something being really, really loose. And I just feel like your brain becomes more engaged when it's like that, you know. Like I love this rose, but this rose wouldn't work without that rose. If it was on its own, it would just look like it hadn't been that carefully painted. It works because that rose tells you what's happening in that one. Does that make sense? Does that make any sense? Hopefully a bit. Let's do our orange rose. I'm going to get a fresh brush out now. By the way, I almost never do this, but I've painted the whole painting so far with one brush, apart from a couple of softeners. Okay, so likewise in this one here, we still have a very, very thin oil couch on it. It's always got to be really thin, the oil couch. Christopher says, as a student, I want to gain knowledge to give me freedom to paint, not to learn how to copy. Yeah, completely. But you're always learning. You know, I keep going back to value studies, and funnily enough, I think a lot of the way I work now has come from the value studies that I've done. You know, a lot of it comes from that. I learned a lot from that, and there's stuff that I found in value studies that I haven't found a way to work in yet, and probably will eventually. Anyway, let's paint. So equally on this rose, the same as the others, we haven't done the lights. So let's sort out the values first. So the lightest part really of this rose that I want to get in first is the outside edge of the cup. You know, where this is the dark part of the cup in shadow. And then just as it turns around into the light right at the top, it goes very light. So I'm going to pick up some of the light color. And again, I'm not going to actually paint the lines. I'm going to touch it in and drag the brush like a tiny amount across the painting just to kind of make the edge, just get the value in there. You see, immediately that value goes in, it redefines everything else. I'm going to try and draw it fairly carefully, but I'm not going to draw strokes. I'm trying to get an impression of it just by putting the edge of the brush down. And it kind of goes up, it goes down, it wibbles along, you know, and it goes all the way around. That's a bit unfortunate. I just got some white paint into my shadow. Well, that's going to be part of the painting now, not much I can do about it. So where else have we got real light? Like there are two petals here at the top, and the inner one, we're looking for direct light, just like we did on the other flowers. The inner one has a little bit of direct light, just showing on the edge of it. So I'm just going to show the edge, just draw the edge of that petal. And it starts to appear, even though you're not really painting anything, you know, just picking up little bits. Where's the light? Where is there any direct light? This petal that comes off to the left here, where it comes up to meet the cup, there's a little bit of direct light just on the edge of it. You know, I'm hardly painting anything, but it's starting to bring the flower to light. The very top petal, this side of it, the left side of it, is in shadow, but there's just the edge of it. There's a tiny bit of it which has some light. And when it comes around to this side, to the right-hand side, it curls around. So there's a little bit of direct light here coming into that top petal there. Just suggest that. We're starting to show a little bit of form. Painting very, very little. So we've also got, this is interesting, like if you have a look at this for a moment, the bottom petal here, the very top edge of it, all of this is in shadow, but the very top edge of it where it sticks out, just here, the light touches it. Just put that in, and it just shows that that petal is coming out into the light. And because we're going into a couch, we can paint really subtly here. It's tiny, you know, tiny little bits. And because we've got like quite a lot painted over here, we don't really need to do much over here. You know, you don't need to do much on this road. I'm almost feeling like leaving it like, like this. You know, I really feel, for me, you know, for you, the orange rose might be the center. For me, this rose is. So where else is there light? Right over on the right-hand side, there's direct light. This petal, as it comes up, just the very outside of it, it curls towards the light and sticks out enough to hit the light. So we put the light in there. This petal here, it's actually coming right out and facing the light, just at the top. So if you see a lighter value, don't just think, right, lighter value patch, I'm just going to put that patch in. Think about why it's there. What's happening to the form there? You know, I think it's really important to try to understand the form. Why is that light there? What's happening to the form? You know, just a few little touches, really. Similarly, this petal right at the bottom here, on the right hand side, just before it disappears behind the white rose at the front, a little bit of it sticks out into the light. So I'm just going to put that, it's just the edge, just put that high value there. Really not painting much at all. Thank you, Christopher. What a lovely thing to say. That's pretty much my goal. Okay, let me know when you're ready to move on, and we're going to do just a little bit inside the cup. Inside the cup here. We're not going to do very much in there. I don't feel personally that the painting's going to need very much in there. I'm not going to do this rose today. If you can get to this rose, then fine, do it. You know, for me, it's like, it's 8 o'clock in the evening. My tummy is rumbling. I've had a long day. So if I start that rose now, I'll rush it. You know, I know that. Even if, like, after the stream was finished and I tried to paint this rose, I haven't put a couch on that one. I would rush it, you know. And it probably wouldn't work so well. But this, you know, I can do. I've got oil couch on here. I'm going to try to make this very economical, this orange rose. And it's interesting when you painted, because we painted both of these two roses as a single subject on their own. This is not so, I don't feel personally, this is not so important, this rose, in the whole composition. As long as you show the form, and all the values are there, and there are no, nothing really stands out as being wrong. I'm just, by the way, I'm just using my finger to kind of smudge these a little bit to try and keep some softness in there. As long as no values are wrong, then it will work, you know, and you can finish it as much as you want to. Don't blame you, Loretta. You're in the UK as well, aren't you? I feel the same. And it's even worse, I can smell some lentil soup being cooked. Yum. I love lentil soup. Can we go on to the center of the rose now, do you think? We're just coming up to like about 2 hours now. So actually let me know at this point if you want to have a break, a 5-10 minute break, if you're flagging, before we paint the center of this rose here. I would imagine we've only got about 15 minutes to go really, before we end this session. So we can have a quick 10-minute break if you feel like you need to get away from it for a little while, or we can go straight through for the next kind of 15 minutes or so, I would say, probably on this rose. Let me know what you would prefer to do. Anne-Marie wants to go. I take it you mean keep going. That's an interesting comment, Mariana. Mariana says my orange needs a lot more work than yours. The chances are, if that's the case, it's something to do with the values, probably more than anything else. So if you squint right down, something might jump out at you. I always feel that if your values are right and your color is good, then you can get away with a lot less. You need to do much less painting if the value is good. I mean the relationship of these values to everything else. So you may find if you feel that you're having to put more work in, that it might be, I would look at the values first, look at the values and the colour and squint right down and see what you feel. Lentils. No, I actually love lentils. And my wife is vegan. Michelle is vegan anyway. So we probably eat, like the boys aren't and I'm not. So we probably kind of, we sort of alternate vegan and non-vegan food. And today is vegan day. And the boys actually love lentil soup. It's their favourite. Well, no, that's a lie. Pizza is their favourite. But lentil soup is up there. How did we get onto this? Okay. Let's go on a little bit into the inside here, okay? So if the values are pretty much okay, and they're not too bad at the moment, right, on this one, I think they're probably about all right. I really feel that I want to be showing the division here. I want to show some of these frills around this area here to show a little bit more the division between the shadow and the light there, and show a little bit more of the form. So I'm going to bring this light color down and mix it with a bit of the higher value kind of right hand, this general color for the right. And I also feel it needs to go a bit more yellow, so I'm going to bring in a little bit of cad yellow just to push it a little bit yellow. Just because you have these colors pre-mixed and laid out, it doesn't mean that they're written in stone. You know, you can change them a little bit if you want to. And I'm going to start bringing in some of the frills, just the top, very top edges. And I'm going to do it the same way. I'm not going to paint the lines. You'll end up with a load of swooshy lines. I'm going to pick out, just by putting the brush down, the edge of the light against the shadow. And bring in a little bit of detail around it, some of these little frills around it. I don't want it to go quite as light as this very light colour here. It's not quite that light. It's a little bit down from there. Just pick out a couple of the very lightest parts. And they come right off that very light edge of the cup. Just a little bit. And then bring in lower value colour. Again, I'm going to bring a little bit more yellow into it. And work down a little bit. So we're kind of going from the light and we're approaching the shadow. And I'm going to go between the very lowest color, the shadow side, and the next color up. So we're gradually working within each frill, if you can see what I mean, from the shadow down, from the light, sorry, down into the shadow. Not trying to paint each individual frill. There is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't, if that's how you want to do it. I just want to paint enough so that I'm convinced, you know, so that I believe the form. This, like this here, if you want to have a look at this for a moment, at the moment, looking at what I've got going on here, this bit here is really standing out to me. And if I squint down, there isn't a very light line there in the rose. That's wrong. So I'm just going to drag across it to soften it and have it disappear into the, with like a darker color, shadow color on the brush. Have it disappear into the rose a bit more. It's like, you know, I'm trying to get away with as little as possible here. Around here, like, there's the lower value, the shadow color, comes round here, which shows that it's disappearing down into the heart of the rose. I want to bring just a little bit of that in as well. So actually painting a lot less of this rose this time than when it was a subject in its own right. And you know, you all did great with this rose. So you basically want to do what you did before, but just paint less of it. Just stop sooner. I'm not going to do any more than that. But what I am going to do is get a very soft brush and just pull it and soften it a little bit, because I don't want any of it to be really too hard. But I'm going to make sure that I keep a hard edge around the edge, around this edge, left-hand side of the cup, because that really shows what's happening to the form there. And I think all I really need is deep shadows on the inside. So I'm mixing like the shadow color that we pre-mixed with some transparent red oxide, just to show these deeper values right in the middle. I'm just thinking about the light, you know, what's happening to the form and the light. It's better to paint simple, large shapes of light and form than it is to paint a lot of detail if the values aren't right. It's not going to help it live more. The bit that you really want to be focusing on is trying to make sure that the values are good. If the values are good, you can get away with murder with everything else. You can paint it a lot more simply. And there's an interesting, like, just around the edge, just around here, this is still a rose, you know, these are still petals, and there is light traveling through the outside of the cup to the inside. And the way to get that is it's slightly higher chroma and higher value. So if you take the shadow color, mix in a little bit of cad yellow, that's going to make it a little bit higher chroma and a little bit lighter, and just touch it in here and there right up to that edge, and it will be enough to show that there's light traveling through that side of the rose. I love lentil soup. I love lentil curry dal. I love delicious with chapatis. Yum. Actually, I must admit, I do make exceedingly good chapatis. Okay, so I've tried to paint very little there. I've tried to paint like as little as I can get away with to show the form. I've painted a lot less than the other rose, than when we did this as a study on its own. I just wanted to bring the form out a little bit. maybe I'm going to leave this one at this point. Maybe would, apart from the bit of fiddling that I can never help but do, possibly for the final session, I might save a little bit of this rose and maybe do a little bit more if I feel like it wants it. The last session is really just like in the first two sessions, like most of the work has been done. The last sessions is just looking for what you think might need to change. And it's not always what you think. I mean, for me, with this painting, I very much felt that this area here needed to change. But as I'm bringing the roses in, I don't even notice it anymore. And I think by the time that rose is done, I probably won't want to do anything with it, really. I will probably just leave it. And it will be fine, you know. Sometimes I look back at my paintings and I think, why didn't I sort that bit out? Why did I just leave it? And other times, you know, I just think, yeah, it's fine. You know, it doesn't need to be, doesn't need any more doing to it than that. I'm just doing a little bit on the outside saucer, if you like, just to make these values a bit more gentle in the transitions of painting into oil. So you can get very, very gentle transitions there if you want to. And put a hard edge on this far left against the green. And maybe we'll feel that the orange rose wants a bit more in the final session, but I'm not sure. At the moment, I'm feeling, if I squint down, it looks like it's sitting in about the right place. So. And sometimes it's hard to remember, like, you know, as I say, for me, this rose is the one, this one down here is the one where I feel the most interesting stuff is going on. And if I paint this rose too much, then it will detract from this one. Trying to be very careful about when I put something down, I want to be thinking about why it's there and what it is. Like this petal at the back here, of the two back petals, it's the inner one, and it curves around. So there's actually transmitted light on this side of it, on the left of it, and the left side is more in shadow. So I'm bringing that in a little bit, just bringing down the value a little bit on the right hand side, just to show that, you know, that there's a curve there. That the petal has a curve to it. I don't think you can paint with this much smoothness and softness without painting into a couch. That's why I love the couch, because of the softness that it gives you. And I'm just going to bring in, I'm going to try and make this the last thing that I do on this rose, because I must admit I'm enjoying myself now. But when I get a painting to a point where I feel like it's hanging together, then I kind of feel like it's play almost at that point. But this rose, the orange rose, has a beautiful, like a blush around the bottom of the cup. It's in shadow, but there's light coming through it, so it has a little bit of chroma. This higher chroma orange blush around the bottom, I think, really is one of the bits, the diaphanous quality. Otherwise, it can seem quite hard. That bit of high chroma there shows you that light is travelling through this, therefore it must be thin. Blake, that is fantastic. I'm so pleased to hear that. Thank you, Howard. It's very nice. I'm so pleased to hear that. That's like what I want. I think what I want more than anything else is to show you stuff that you can take away and run with and practice with and improve. And I want to get you excited about where your painting might go. But if in one of these sessions you manage to do something which surprises you and that you're really pleased with, then I'm a very happy man. But obviously that doesn't always happen. You know, I mean, sometimes it's just hopefully just showing you something maybe that you haven't tried before, or you know. Okay. So we're just coming up to about 2.5 hours now, which I think is pretty much the kind of the limit for usefulness on on these sessions. I find if I go much past this point, I get tired and I'm not as clear in what I'm doing. Jan, if you're having trouble with that, if you have the same paints that I have, that to get that deep rich red, get some transparent red oxide, okay, and some quinacridone rose and mix them together. That gets you a very strong orange red. And then if you want to bring the value up a little bit, bring in some cad yellow, and that will keep the chroma. But be careful of that transparent red oxide. It's easy to overdo it. But it's the quinacridone rose which is really bringing in the red. You know, so if you want more red, bring in more quinacridone rose. It's very useful colour because it's very low value. Rich chroma at a low value. I'm actually having trouble stopping now. I should stop. Leave it alone. Great. Great job. Okay, so I'm going to wind up the session now. Hopefully that was enjoyable and you got something out of it. The last session, which will be next Monday, will be just looking at things that you feel you need to finish off. Now, this is going to be different for everybody, depending on the stage that your painting is at. If, excuse me, if any of it you feel isn't hanging together, look at the values first. Squint right down. It's more important a lot of the time just to look than it is to have a brush in your hand and paint. You know, when I'm actually painting, I reckon I probably spend way more time just looking than actually painting. The looking is the most important thing, and asking questions. If that's not hanging together, why? Don't panic and try and throw on more paint to improve it. It's unlikely to do that, you know. Think about, you know, relate parts to different parts. Like if this isn't working, you know, what value does that need to be compared to, say, this value here or that value there? Are the shadows values working? Are they making sense? What value does that need to be compared to this here? You know, these are the things to really look closely at. If you feel that something isn't working, it's rarely some technique is going to get you out of that. It's usually values and color. Excuse me, and especially edges and chroma. I would say the areas that I'm sorry, I'm really struggling with my voice now. Let me just get some water. The areas that I put a lot of emphasis on in my painting and when I teach are that other people I think don't put as much emphasis on as I do, are chroma and edges. Obviously, you need to have decent drawing and your values need to be good. You know, that's a given. That's like the price of showing up. But beyond that, it's the chroma and the edges really bring things alive, you know. Junior, thank you. I'm actually fine. I've just been talking for too long with a bit of a sore throat. That's all. But I'm actually fine. I'm feeling fine in myself. Just got a little bit of a cold. Actually went out for a really long bike ride with my eldest boy yesterday, and it was freezing cold. We got stuck in loads of mud. It was really hard work, and he's like shooting off ahead of me. Come on, Dad. And I'm like, oh, God, I can't do it. And I'm suffering a little bit because of that. All right, I know I said I was going to stop. No, I am. I am going to stop. Stop. Kimberly, that's brilliant. If you get a realization for where you a bit of insight into where you feel you can put some attention to improve your own process, then that's really fantastic news. I'm kind of liking this, just looking at this at the moment, I'm kind of liking how it's almost getting almost like there's wind in here. And a lot of that is for me, it's the direction and the brush marks of these leaves, so I probably don't want to play with them very much beyond a couple of little accents maybe and the little red berries. But I don't think I'm going to do any more on this rose because I like it like that, and I'm probably going to do even less on this rose than that rose, and it's kind of bringing a nice, for me anyway, like I said, all these things are aesthetic choices, but for me, I think focus is quite an important thing in painting though. So, thank you so much for coming and trying so hard and being so inspiring to teach. We have one more session to go. Which will be, as I say, just really, the last one will be really about focus and finishing and looking at little bits that are wrong, fixing bits that are wrong, and trying to bring things out where we want to bring them out. As I say, that will be different for all of us, depending on what stage your painting is at on the third stage. So I'm going to try, mostly I will be trying to show you how I would approach thinking about that and demonstrate it for you, and then hopefully you will be able to translate some of that into what you're doing as well. Okay. I'm actually very excited because I was walking around the garden today, and although we got snow on our garden, the daffodils are coming out. The snowdrops are already out and the daffodils are coming. And I've absolutely settled for sure, because it seemed like it was such a popular idea and I would love to do it, is to do a spring flowers workshop. It's going to be starting quite soon. What I'm going to do is, I've also been thinking about, I know that quite a few of you are coming to more than one workshop, and I feel I need to do something for you. So, I always do them like I have an early bird kind of sign up price. Well, there's going to be an even lower price for anyone who's on this workshop who wants to go on to the next one, because you're really inspiring to teach, and it's I really appreciate you coming back. It's like a big vote of confidence for me. I take it as and it means a lot to me. So we're going to be doing that. Spring flowers. I just need this wintry weather to go away. Tomorrow's going to be -2, so I'm hoping that the daffodils all survive. I think they'll be fine. But thanks very much for coming today, everybody. I'll post this tomorrow with some close-up shots of the roses so you can see how rough they really are. A lot of the time they look better on the screen than they do in the flesh. And we'll take it from there. Please post your stuff, and I'll see you tomorrow in the group. Bye for now.